Hey, I'm Noah.
Hey, I'm Tim.
And this is our ongoing comic strip AP of Dogs in the Vineyard.
All right, we're continuing with Terrence Witt in the city of Bridal Falls. So Terrence Witt, played by Noah, had a bit of a flashback last session, hearing about the initiation rite of how you came to be a dog.
Right. Yeah, we saw he got beat by his father, which we didn't define beforehand, but now that's the kind of man he is.
So speaking of those conflicts, when something comes up as a conflict, it's because something is at stake.
Right.
And we resolve that with dice. We've talked about that being an off-radio thing that happens. But sometimes the dice are really stacked in your favor, or maybe against your favor, and I can speak as having played Clementine. I rarely had good dice in my favor.
Right, you normally lose.
Yeah, and for Terrence, that was pretty different, right?
Yeah.
Do you feel like knowing that you would win those conflicts made them less interesting, or there would be less certainty about what would happen, what would shape your character?
No, not less interesting. I mean, the real trick of this game, and most games, I think, is setting up stakes where there is no right answer.
Cool. Let's see how Terrence does with the conflict this time.
Yeah, let's do it. It's a warm spring morning in Bridal Falls, Sunday, and my first time back in a real church in quite a while. As I walk through the giant double doors, the room is already filled, and my father is there at the pulpit. Normally, I prefer to stay in the back, but as he sees me, he beckons me forward, and it's quite obvious he's saved a seat for me in the front. It's strange to be back in the church. It's both familiar and not. My name's Terrence Witt, and I'm a dog.
So it is packed. This is a tall church, lofty exposed beams up above, painted glass windows, and as your father, Elder William Witt, opens his mouth to speak, amber light just starts glowing through the windows, and you see bright specks of dust floating in the air in front of you. On either side of you, let's just say a young dog and an old dog.
Sure.
All the brothers would be in these aisles, and then on the other side of the nave would be all the aisles of sisters. And I think those double doors are propped open at this point because people are spilling in, even back in the narthex in the back of the church. There's city-goers, I guess, people who are not necessarily dogs, but faithful of Bridal Falls, there to hear that sermon crammed into the back.
Sure.
I raise my eyes to the mountaintops, and all around me I see a brilliant, radiating light from the King of Life in our chosen territory here. But yea, shadows beckon from east. These long, dark shadows follow even the faithful like ourselves, and they come in many forms. And people murmur at that.
Sure.
They come in the forms of the dogmatists. People hiss at that. The spiritualists. People boo at that. And the heathens of the east. And as people start clamoring around at that, he motions with his hands for everyone to be still. And in these days when shadows creep into our bright and unspoiled land, a war is brewing. And there's a younger dog on your side. He's a couple years younger than you, and his coat is in near perfect condition. He stands up at that, and you see, I would say, a few dozen other younger dogs on either side of the church standing up. They give a solemn nod to the pulpit. Some of the older ones, like the older dog on the other side of you, looks a bit concerned at the vitriol being spewed here.
Sure. It feels a little weird. And especially what he's talking about it to try to preserve the faith, but in doing so, going against the faith.
He spreads his hands wide to the crowd, gesturing to all, and then he points to you. He asks you to also stand with those other dogs who have stood.
Sure, I stand.
The king is your sun, and the king is your shield, and dogs, we need to protect what is ours. And that means rising up against the territorial authority and any who align themselves with the godless bureaucrats. My son, Terrence Witt, would you lead this charge to bring back what is the land of the faithful, striking down the authority and any who stand on their side? And heads turn to look at you.
Yeah. So yeah, I think I walk up to stand by him and to address the crowd. I'm not used to speaking to a large crowd like this, so maybe my voice is a little quiet,
Right.
and some people can't necessarily hear me all the way in the back.
It's a big church, and you need a booming voice.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Father, for this this honor, I suppose. The territorial authority is breaching on some of our lands and our faithful, but I just want to remind everybody that the reason we came out here is to uphold our tenets of our faith, and we should not abandon them in the pursuit of this war. Thank you. And I kind of go and just like...
and just leave it at that.
And I just leave it at the back, and I just like walk off and sit back down at the front.
Those other younger dogs whose eyes were trained on you when they're up there, their gaze falters and they look like they're unsure if they should sit or not. They kind of half squat and look to your father, and there's stern look.
Sure.
Those piercing blue eyes, shoot a nasty glance at you, and then he quickly motions for them all to sit down.
Sure.
And I think without letting too much time pass, would launch into reading from the Book of Life.
Yeah.
Before people think too much about that statement.
Right.
So let's have it, I would say in the church, but after the service.
Yeah.
So everyone has come and talked to the elder, your father. Several have congratulated you for the work that you've done and for being called out for your deeds. Let's have it back on that stage again. I think we would see a slow pan over the candles and the quilts that are hanging from the wall. But as we pan around to the aisles, it's completely empty, and that light's no longer shining through. That sun's gone behind a cloud, and we see just you and your father standing there.
Well, your war, huh? Seems like pretty strong rhetoric.
The strength that is needed to uphold the virtues of which you spoke. Now, son, I fear that your faith may falter, and that you do not trust neither the guiding light of the King of Life or the own words of your father.
Well, no, sir, my faith is strong, but, it's a sticky situation.
He shakes his head and, with his hands behind his back, walks to one of those large painted windows. But son, the war has already started. The territorial authority and the heathens of the east, those who stayed secluded in their cities, they move out west. Their numbers grow by the day, and they come to populate our towns, these shining gems like the city of Eden, and even start their own settlements. Oh, they're fighting us, perhaps not yet with guns, but by false doctrine. And that's an attack on our very faith. So the first stone has already been cast, my son. Will you defend the faith, or will you walk away?
Tell me, Father, what does your second stone look like?
There are a generation of young dogs whom I've kept here rather than sending off to name babies and anoint the sick. You would have a force of your own against the unjust, to take down the territorial authority and to remind the people of the one true faith.
So what's at stake is, will I lead these 30 dogs my way or my father's way? Well, now, Father, I do agree that we have a problem with the territorial authority. I do not agree that we want to be calling into war. I think we try to enact change in smaller ways at first, and, violence should be a last recourse.
They are many, we are few, and they assemble their ranks as we speak. Now, if you are patient and wait for them to assemble, what would you do when hundreds of marching men come upon you like a firing squad?
Well, you just haven't been out in a while. It ain't like that. Sure, there's people that live in our communities that aren't faithful, each to their own choice, but as far as a military resistance, well, there just ain't hundreds of men out there with guns trying to kill us.
My young son, my inexperienced dog of a son. The King of Life has spoken to me about the lengths of these shadows that gather. If we don't strike first, we will be but a lost faith. When you see the will of the people, when they listen to my words, what makes you think you have a choice about how I will send you to take care of this matter?
If I live in a world where I don't have this choice, well, then what am I even fighting for? I'll lead them, but you got to make sure that they listen to what I say. Otherwise, there ain't no point in me being out there.
What do you say? Do you say avoid bloodshed at all costs? That we can convince the sinners and the liars and the peddlers of illicit substances that they too can be good if they just believe? Oh, there's the faithful and then there's everyone else. He breaks his gaze with you and instead walks to the pulpit and flips through pages of the Book of Life and then mightily slams down his hand onto the book as he doesn't even need to read from it. His eyes are closed right now. The King of Life is my protector. He leads me in paths of righteousness. I fear not evil doing. And he turns to you and says, son, you will know the way.
So I'm riding out of Bridal Falls now, and although it's a bright spring day, my heart is a little heavy. My horse Rio is leading 30 dogs now up this winding mountain trail. We're all in a single file, and I can feel the excitement and vitriol coming off those other dogs, but I am not as excited as them. My Father has sent us off to Eden to renew the heart of our faith. It's a long journey, and it'll take us a while to get there, especially with so many of us. But here we go to war.
Hi, this is Jason from the Gauntlet Gaming Community. If you enjoyed this episode of Comic Strip AP, please consider supporting the Gauntlet on Patreon. Our page can be found at patreon.com/gauntlet.